Hello and welcome. My name is Mildred. In this lesson, we are going to look at how to store the data entered into the form field in local or session storage. Now in JavaScript, we have two methods of storing data on the client side. We have the local storage, which stores this data without an expiration date. So every time you open your browser window, the data remains. And session storage, which stores the data until you close your browser window, and then the data is lost. So we're going to look at this. There are several applications of this when you get into the advanced JavaScript, but we're going to limit this to the basics. And for those who are going to go on to become a full stack JavaScript developer, you're going to learn all of this later on. I have created a file called localstorage.js, and I've added the file to my registration form. I'm going to be using the registration form for this demo here. I'm going to do two things. I want to first of all create a function that will collect all of these inputs and store them in a variable, and then I want to store them in a local storage, and then I also want to create another function that is going to retrieve everything stored in the local storage to apply them on the form whenever the form is refreshed or loaded. The first function I'll create is a function I'll call store. This store function is going to collect all of the information entered into the form fields here. Now refer back to the last lesson where we did the form field validation and understand how we did this. So we have said that whenever we are retrieving the values entered into form field, we'll say document.forms, and then we'll call the name of the form field dot value. So you do this for all of the form fields and store them in a variable. The next thing I want to do is that I want to get all of these items and send them to local storage. So I will say local storage is written like this, and the S is in uppercase. So local storage dot, I use the set item method. So this is all you need to do. Local storage dot set item, I want to give it a key. So the key I'll give this, I'll just make it first name so it will be easy. And I want this first name to store the first name variable. So whatever is entered into the first name variable is going to be stored in the local storage with the key first name for retrieval. So I'll do this for middle name. So let me copy this and make this very fast for us. Copy. So I'm going to be setting middle name, and middle name is named middle name. I'll set last name, and it's named last name. I'll set unique ID, and the name is unique ID. I'm going to put the sex, and it's called sex. The gender identity. So we've stored all of the data entered into this field in the local storage on the browser. For us to be able to use this, we want to do this whenever the window is loaded. So let's use this window.onload like this. So we'll use the window.onload, and we are going to make this a function. So I'm going to write what is going to happen once the window is loaded here. So the first thing I want to do is always check if my browser supports local storage, and I'll put this in an if statement. So I'll say if local storage like this. So if local storage is supported, then I want it to do something. So if local storage is supported, I want to get the form. So I'll say form is equal to document. Either I use documents.getElementById form, or I just use document.forms.the form name. So let's say the document.getElementById, and the ID is, so let's see what ID the form element holds. The ID is register. So documents.getElementById register. What we want to do is to add an event listener here. So say form.add event listener. So add the event listener to the submit event. So whenever the form is submitted, we want something to happen. We want to call the store function like this. When the window is loaded, we want to call this, run this function, and what we want it to do is to check if local storage is supported. We want it to get the form that the ID is register, and we want to add an event listener on the submit and call the store function when this happens. We have collected all of the values for the form field, and we have said that we want to set all of the items in the local storage with this key and the values. We are going to use an else statement here to see if local storage is supported. So we'll say else, let's say window.alert local storage is not supported. So let's look at our file referencing to see. So we have our script tag. Let's make sure that we have the local storage.js file, added to the page. Yes, we have it there, and I'm going to look at local storage dot get item. I want to get the item whose name is first name, and then it is empty. So let's fill in this form. So I'm going to fill this and I'll register. So on registration now, I'm going to refresh this page. I'm going to say local storage, and I'm going to get all of the items stored in my browser. So we'll say local storage.get item, and we want to get the value stored in the first name. And when I click enter, I get the value stored. So this is how we use it from the console. But now we are going to do something so that every time we refresh, we want it to populate what we have entered previously. So we're going to go back to our local storage file. One thing I want to do, I want to create another function here. And what I want the second function now to do is to populate the form field with the values in the local storage. So I'll make its function populate like this. I'm going to do exactly the same thing I have done here, but instead of set item, I'm going to be getting item. But I'm going to check first of all if values are entered into the field. So what I'll do is copy this, paste it here to populate what was there before. I am not going to be getting the value. I just want to get the field. So I'm going to do this first name and take out the value. So I don't want the value. I want to get the form field. So there are many ways you can do this, but this is the method I'm using for this demo. So now I have all of these here. So the next thing I want to do now is to check if there are values stored in the local storage. Then I want to retrieve these values. So I'm going to do it like this. If local storage dot get item. So we use the get item method to get the item, set item to set the item. So once we get the first name item is not equal to null, we want to do something. So the next thing we'll do now is to say the first name field dot value should now be equal to the local storage dot get item. And the item we're getting is the item stored in the first name field. So when we save this, before we leave this page, we try just for the first name. Let's see if it works before we try for other field. Before we save this, we want that when this is loaded immediately, if local storage is there, we just want to call the populate function so that it immediately checks if there's anything stored in the local storage, populates the field. So when I refresh this page now, it has first name stored, so it populates it automatically with Mildred because Mildred is what we have in the local storage. So this works. So I can go back down there to do the same thing for the middle name, for the last name, and for all the other form fields. So I will just copy this. So now because I'm getting the value, when I refresh, all the values I selected will now be populated here. So I don't have them coming back here. They're not populated, so there must be an error here. So one of these must have an error that is making this problematic. So let's look at the console to see what the error is. So the error is invalid or unexpected token on line 65. So let's look at what is on line 65 and then we'll see what our error is. So this is where the error is. I didn't close this. So save this, refresh our page, and we'll have the values retained in the field. So this is how we use local storage. So you can store values and send them to a new page also. And we're not going to look at that complication in this course, but this is one application. You can store things offline and use those values that are stored in the browser to set values later on. So these are the methods we use for local storage. You can use local storage.clear to clear what the local storage is. And now for session storage, you just replace all occurrence of local to session like this, and it takes the same syntax. The difference is that when you close the browser window and you open a new browser window, or you reopen the browser window, everything is going to be lost. Local remains forever until you clear it out. So every time you type something new, you are going to be replacing the value stored in that field in the local storage. And so you can persist this data across pages if you choose to explore that option. So this is where we end this lesson. Thank you and see you in the next lesson.